I've always been interested in electric skateboards. So this year, for my birthday, as a gift to myself, I'm gonna build my own Frankenstein skateboard. Stick around to the end of the video to see if I feel it was worth it to build my own skateboard, or if I would recommend just buying one. This might be my last birthday. So let's rewind the clock back a decade or two so I can help you understand how much skateboarding played a role in my life. I was probably 3 or 4 years old when I got my first skateboard. It was an old school Caballero board, but it wasn't until I was a little bit older that I started to take it more seriously. Some of the first projects I remember making were ramps for my friends and I to jump over anything and everything. I would spend any moment that I wasn't working or in school on my skateboard. I would spend hours and hours trying to learn new tricks. We started skating around our neighborhood until all of our friends got our license, and then it was game on. We would drive all over the place to different skate parks, different street spots. We would even make it to different states. Unlike other sports, you are your biggest competition, and your friends were always there to cheer you on. We had so much fun, no bills to pay, no responsibilities. It was some of the best times of my life, and I owe a lot of it to skateboarding. So the first thing I did was find all the parts on eBay. I placed my order, then it all showed up on my doorstep a couple days later. I got the trucks, the wheels, the risers, the cables, the batteries, and the remote. So first things first, we gotta make our skateboard. When making a skateboard, you have 7 layers of hard rock maple. You have 5 long grain and 2 cross grain. In between each layer, you make sure you spread a full thick layer of glue, and then once it dries, it cures, and it stays in its skateboard shape. I've probably made 4,000 or 5,000 skateboards.
This is my basement where I make all my boards.
Sold them all out of the trunk of my car too, man. So this is my cheap longboard mold. I've got an actual shortboard press with a concrete mold that my dad and I made when I was like 18 or something. It's got 2 20-ton bottle jacks on it. And that one we pressed for the shortboards. I didn't make as many longboards as I did the regular boards, so I didn't need a big press for that. So we just used some 2x, some glue, and clamps for this one. Now that we have our blank, we're gonna drill out our holes to mount our trucks. To do that, we're gonna find the center of the skateboard, mark out the holes, drill them out, and make sure it fits. When I was coming up with the shape of this skateboard, I just kind of freehanded it, using old designs and ideas from the old longboards that I used to make. Once I like the shape of the board, we're gonna bring it over to the bandsaw and we're gonna cut out 1/2 of the board. With that cut off, I'm gonna flip it over, put it on the other side, trace it out, and this will ensure that I have a mirror image on both sides of the board. If you don't have a bandsaw, don't worry, you can still use a jigsaw to cut this out. Using a jigsaw is a little more freehand, so it might not be as straight as using a bandsaw, but it still will work. After you cut the board out, this is really just a rough cut. The next step, sanding, will get it to your finished shape. Now we gotta round over the edges. This is the original Pressure Skateboards router. I've had this thing since I was like 15. Pressure Skateboards was my skateboard company that I made because I was tired of spending $60 on brand new skateboards in high school. So out of my frustration, I just started making my own boards. And that's how my skateboard company became a thing. So using the router, I'm gonna make a rough cut of the profile around the edge of the board. I'm gonna do this on the top and the bottom of the board. You only need to do this one time. Once we sand the edges down, we're gonna take it over to the flap sander and we're gonna use that to get rid of any other imperfections that are on the board. If you left this square and it hits the ground, slams into the ground, it chips real bad. So if you round it, it makes it so it's not as dramatic when it does hit the ground, because you're trying to hit the ground. So now that we have the finished shape of the board all done, we're gonna go on to the new part to me. This is mounting the actual brain and the battery of the skateboard. I've never done this before, so we're kind of just gonna figure it out as we go. So once I've determined where the brain and the battery of the board will be mounted, I flip the board over and I have to route out a slot for the wires of the board. This is to make sure that the wires are flush with the top of the board and not sticking out. Now we're gonna use some 80 grit sandpaper to take down all the burrs and the rough spots of these slots. Once we have the slots routed out on the top, we're gonna work on mounting all the wires. In order to wire this together, we had to cut them, heat shrink them back together. I had to kind of put my electrician's cap on to make sure that this is gonna work in the end. Although my electrician skills aren't that great, I've always been into building and carpentry. I built my first half pipe when I was 19 in my mom's backyard using our shed as a roll-in. So if you're a bigger fan of woodworking and carpentry as I am, make sure you hit that like button. So let's finish all this wiring and make sure this thing works. So thankfully all these parts came from the same skateboard, so it's kind of just making sure that all the colors matched, and I put it all back together in the correct way to make sure it all worked. So it's kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of process in order to make sure it all worked in the end. Working with all these little electronics, it is a challenge, but it is something that I would like to do with more future woodworking projects. It's alive! Now that we know that it all works, we're gonna finish mounting the trucks, grip the board, and we're gonna take it out for a test run. The best part of any build is to test out your creation for the first time. If I were to do it all again, I would probably just buy an electric skateboard. It ended up taking a lot longer and it was a little bit more difficult than I expected, especially without having any plans. But being back on a board does remind me of all the good times that I had when I was growing up skateboarding. With all that said and done, this reminds me that there are still plenty of good times to come.